So the topic of a Resident Evil 4 remake is very divisive, and for good reasons. Resi 4 is held up as one of the best video games of all time, and just about every aspect of it is hyper-connected and adds to the game's overall identity. The cheesy one-liners, the over-the-top action set pieces, the QuickTime events, and the game just being this overall crazy 80s action movie. Resident Evil 4 is also in a weird spot where it is starting to show its age in some places, but as a whole the game still holds up pretty well. And the game is super accessible. If you have a console from the last 10 years or a PC, you can go out and you can play Resident Evil 4 no problem, at an almost guaranteed high resolution and 60 plus frames per second. But clearly all signs are pointing towards a remake of Resident Evil 4. There's been rumors running rampant since basically the start of 2020, teasers and Easter eggs, and I could make a strong case that Resident Evil Village kind of set fans up for Resident Evil 4 to come back. From the setting, the characters and enemies, the inventory, the shop, and even the intro is very Resident Evil 4, and I don't think all of that is a coincidence at all. The remakes of 2 and 3 sold and reviewed extremely well, so obviously Capcom is going to want to keep that money train barreling down the tracks. And with it being late October, almost Halloween, now feels like the perfect time to sit down and have the talk. Does Resident Evil 4 need a remake? Resident Evil 4 was really the first game that popularized the third-person shooter perspective that so many games after went on to perfect. And we're at the point now that 16 years later, we're basically seeing it in its final form with the remakes of Resident Evil 2 and 3. And by taking a look at both of the remakes and Resident Evil Village, we get a pretty good proof of concept of what a Resident Evil 4 remake would actually look like. The shooting and the punching of 3R combined with the inventory, the merchant, environments, and pretty much everything else from Resident Evil Village. While I was playing through Village, I felt like that DiCaprio meme where he's like sitting up and pointing at the TV and going, "Oh, that's from 4, I remember that." And it's so weird because the games are separated by time, console generations, and even the camera perspective, but I could feel some of my muscle memory from 4 coming back while I was playing. Upgrading my weapons, using the merchant, looking for treasure, even the enemies reminded me a lot of the Ganados from 4. The way they could dodge, they used weapons and armor. I think that Resident Evil 8 was a really good warm-up and kind of laying the groundwork while teasing fans for a Resi 4 remake. But obviously not all the gameplay quirks from 4 are going to make the cut in a remake, and we know that, but the thing that sticks out to me the most is the QuickTime events. Resident Evil 4 came out way back at the dawn of QuickTime events, back when they were cool if they ever were, and replaying it again, there are a lot. Every time you get grabbed by a Ganado, when you fall off the boat during the lake monster fight, every set piece and boss fight are pretty much reliant on them, and I could go on, but you get my point. This is one of the aspects of 4 that didn't necessarily age very well. In these days, QTEs aren't exactly a highly respected mechanic, and they're getting used less and less over time. So I'm really interested to see what they do with this, because there's so many parts of the game that are, like I said, reliant on QuickTime events. So if they want to either take them out completely or at the very least tone them down, they're going to have to rework a lot of things. But I don't think that's the end of the world, because as far as the big action set pieces go where you're running from a boulder and you have to spam X, Capcom has proven that they can do these massive scale set pieces really damn well. Like the Gator Chase in Resident Evil 2 Remake. The Nemi Chase and running him off a building in 3R. And stuff like the minecart or the boulder chase could translate really well to the new style. And there are so many of them in 4. This is one of the longer Resident Evils, and there is some really crazy stuff that happens in this game. And I just can't help but wonder how much of that is actually going to make the cut. Resident Evil 3 had some cuts from the remake, and it ended up feeling really short, and a lot of the massive Resident Evil fans weren't too happy about that. And the thing is that I think cutting anything from 4 especially is going to be very, very risky. Just because a lot more people have played 4 at this point, just because of how accessible it is. You can play it on pretty much every console, and there's just so many iconic and memorable moments in it that could be subject to some pretty serious reworks, if not straight up cuts. One thing that I know a lot of people are hoping gets fixed are the missions where you have to escort Ashley. These parts really annoy me personally, and I actually got to try out the VR version of the game recently, and I can tell you that Ashley is just as annoying in VR. It's 2021, and games like God of War and The Last of Us have proved that AI companions can actually be somewhat competent now. So if the Ashley missions do end up being there, I hope that this is one part of the game that gets some serious love. I'm starting to ramble a little bit here, but like I've said, most of the pieces are there already. The Resident Evil 3 remake gives you an idea of what the gameplay could look like, and Village shows us, well, pretty much the rest. I feel like I can close my eyes and see the gameplay so clearly, and I'm pretty psyched for that. But what I have a hard time envisioning is the story and the dialogue, and that's basically the other half of what people love about Resident Evil 4. Everyone loves cheesy Leon, so I hope they can find a way to keep all that weird stuff.
Leon, how you holding up?
Bad question, Hunnigan.
Sorry to hear that. I'm sending you a playing manual. Hope you find it useful.
I'll take a look at it, thanks.
Don't box it into being a sequel to the 2 and 3 remakes, just give 4R the freedom to be whatever the hell it needs to be. Online, it seems like a lot of people are pretty much split down the middle on a Resident Evil 4 remake. Some people are all for it, and some are very against it, and both sides definitely have their place. Where I'm at with this is that I think a remake of 4 is pretty much inevitable. It's been being teased way too much, there's been way too many rumors, and it's too big of a cash cow opportunity to just not do it. But in doing a remake, I think that some of the charm from the original is going to be lost, and I think we're at risk of a lot of that kind of being lost. I mean, Resident Evil 4 is just such a product of its time and just kind of like a cultural timepiece from when it came out. And I don't think they're going to be able to modernize a lot of that dialogue and the characters in a meaningful way. Hell, some of that is probably even going to get cut. But the thing with Resident Evil 4 is that it's been re-released so many times on basically every single console, and it even now has a VR version. So if you end up not liking the remake, the original is still really easily accessible. If you want to, you're going to be able to play the original and the remake on the same console, which is actually pretty cool. And I honestly hate using that "if you don't like it, don't buy it" argument. I really hate it when people say that, because most of the time it's completely missing the point. But I do think that Resident Evil 4 is a very unique case, just because you can go onto the PlayStation Store or Steam or Xbox, even the Nintendo Switch, and buy Resident Evil 4 brand new with no problems. And you can't say the same thing for the original 3 Resident Evil games. They're just not as accessible. My point is that I think we're in a world where the original Resident Evil 4 and a remake can coexist. And as someone who loved both of the remakes and Village, I'm personally really excited to see how Capcom takes all the stuff we talked about and meshing it together into one Resident Evil-ass game. But that's just me, and I'm excited to see what you guys have to say about all this down in the comments. What do you want to see out of a Resident Evil 4 remake? What do you think is going to get cut? And tell me why you do or don't want a remake in the first place. If you made it through to the end, please drop a like, because it really does help me out, and consider subscribing if you're new around here. Thanks for checking out the video, guys, and until next time, have a good one.